Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon you all, brothers and sisters, on this very august and important occasion. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'll ask you tonight to bear with me as this is a relatively thought-out speech. I usually wing it. Given I'm coming to Trobe University, an august institution of advanced learning, I did not wing it. I did my homework. But before I commence into some of the points I have tonight, I'd like to acknowledge some of the royal family of the Australian and the Australian Muslim community that is here. And you'll see what I mean by that. I'd like to acknowledge Adil Salman, the President of the Islamic Council of Victoria. Of course, Professor John Dewar, AO, the Vice Chancellor of Trobe University and a fellow lawyer. I always like fellow lawyers. Zakaria Waheed, the General Manager of the Islamic Council of Victoria. The fabulous Sheikh Ala Al-Zukhm, the Imam of the Heidelberg Mosque. Mustafa Fahur, Founder, Director of the Islamic Museum of Australia, an all-round brilliant guy. Azmina Hussain, the Chair of IMA. Sheena Watt, Member for the Northern Metropolitan Region. Sayyid Muazzam, the Consul General of Pakistan. A member of the Melbourne Islamic community for as long as I've known Melbourne is Almir Kolan, Islamic Finance Specialist, and of course Professor Abati, who invited me, originally facilitated the invitation here tonight. And what I mean by the royals, before I go into it, is that around us, these tables here, in the Australian Muslim community, you don't earn your title as a royal by inheriting anything. You've got to do a lot of work. You've got to be very present. And the people I mentioned from the Australian Islamic community, I do not do so in vain. We're jealous in Sydney of the calibre of leadership and the ability and the hard work, even things I've been told tonight about Preston Mosque, for example, and beyond. But in that vein, I'll start by saying my talk tonight can be kind of summarised in the following quotes. A person is either your brother in faith or your equal in humanity, said Imam Ali, the fourth Caliph, i.e. leader of Islam. When you do something you love, it's not really work, said someone you may know, a guy called, God rest his soul, John Ilhan. The Crescent Group is about opening up tomorrow to everyone and to work to contribute to the social fabric of Australia. Proud to be Australian, proud to be Muslim, proud to be Australian Muslim. The Crescent Wolf is a passionate supporter of the Australian Muslim community and a strong believer in collective prosperity for all Australians. With more than 12,000 members, we offer all Australians an attractive superannuation alternative that aligns with their ethical and Islamic beliefs and Islamically compliant investing. As we approach the 10th anniversary of the formation of Crescent, I have been reflecting this month on the journey we have taken together to build this institution with your generous support. The Australian Muslim persona has evolved significantly over the last 10 years. 10 years ago was the height of the onslaught against our Islamic identity, you may recall, with the rise of Daesh and the unfortunate events in some of our cities. But we were strong, but on the defensive, and sometimes, it seemed, under attack. 10 years on, I feel our community has become more confident in its Australian Muslim identity. We're increasingly displaying the wonderful mix of Australian humour, being laconic, the love of life and sticking up for what's right, and combining this with our Islamic values of fairness, justice, caring for the weak and the underprivileged, as Aussie as they get. We also are more united in our mindset and increasingly no longer consider ourselves to be Australian Muslim Lebanese or Australian Muslim Turk or Australian Muslim Sri Lankan, but just Australian Muslim. That is, if you know the Australian Muslim community, a massive step. As I look around the Australian population centres, I'm delighted to see a thriving generation of Muslims who are increasingly integrated within with the fabric of Australian society. Growing numbers of Australian Muslims wear their faith as a badge of honour, as I do, and do not shy away from discussions on its pertinent matters. Australian Muslims are making huge leaps in all walks of life. I see them everywhere, from business to government to the highest levels of Australian representation sports, building business conglomerates and making policy decisions for all Australians, again, contributing to the social fabric. But there is a lot more that we can do. It really is a beautiful thing to witness, but as I stand here before you, I must acknowledge some failings. There's a long way to go before Australian Muslims can be regarded as fully integrated with and accepted by the Australian society as a whole and by other cultural groups. How can this be when 49% of the Australian population is born overseas, and according to the 2016 census? How could this be when 85% of Australians feel diversity has benefited the country, this country, our country, according to the Scanlon Foundation 2020 Mapping Social Cohesion Survey? Well, the same survey also reveals some shocking statistics about Australian Muslims that should be regarded as a wake-up call to our country and community leaders. Of those surveyed, 49% of respondents had a lot of negative feelings about Muslims as opposed to other faiths. Among Australian Muslim respondents, 6% said they did not feel welcome or part of Australian society and did not feel Australian. And not surprising, 80% of Australian Muslims surveyed said they had experienced prejudice or discrimination. This is a staggering statistic when you consider that 78% of Australian Muslims have a graduate level university degree relative to 30% of the Australian nation. Let me say that again in slightly more lucid English. 78% of Australian Muslims have a degree, entry level. Only 30%, a third of the Australian population have that kind of degree, but those feelings continue. And for me, for my great nation, and I'm a nationalist, and I use that in the best possible term, I love my country, Australia, it is a blight on our nation. These statistics don't show that we are a lucky country. We are a lucky country for some. It seems that if you were born a Muslim in Australia, you're unlucky and face an uneven playing field, or at least that's how a lot of non-Muslims see it. Quite simply, this has to change. And I've got to make a distinction between Melbourne and Sydney. As you know, I'm from Sydney. That is a much more significant problem in Sydney than it is in Melbourne. And that will take another talk, but it still exists in Victoria as well. Fully integrating Australian Muslims as a priority is what I urge whoever is elected to be the next federal government. That must be focused on. It was saddening to see a reported claim by a former electoral candidate just recently being sidelined because he was Lebanese by the current Prime Minister in his pre-selection. And the allegation, the smear, was that he was Muslim. The smear. And this has become a political football on a national front. I think we all want Australia to be a country where this simply does not happen. So what's the solution? So what can Australia and our leaders do about this? Because I believe if you're not part of the solution, you're definitely part of the problem. And the Australian Muslim community, inshallah, God willing and hopefully, is not part of that problem. Following its 2021 report that the Australian Human Rights Commission issued, a list of findings and recommendations to support Australian Muslims. And I'd like to draw your attention to some of those great findings. The Commission found there needed to be more diversity and inclusion and inclusive practices in the workplace. It noted that Muslim communities expressed a view that there was a necessary lack of diversity measures, not a lack of diversity measures, but a lack of implementation and of inclusion practices across businesses and organisations. The message here is that if organisations talk about diversity, they also need to walk that talk. Secondly, the Commission found that Australian Muslims need more visible allies outside the community to help support and aid social cohesion. It also noted the responsibility to educate and defend Muslims should not lie only with the Australian Muslim community alone. There should be those national institutions. I'm sure we can all think of examples where a prominent Australian Muslim was under attack in silence by others. A third finding was that Australian Muslims noted the lack of cultural competency in the workplace and the negative effects that this had on everyday lives. Prayer spaces and inclusive networking events were mentioned as steps organisations could take to address these problems. And so, coming back to Crescent Wealth, the next steps on our journey. At Crescent, we are actively working to ensure that we have a community that's financially empowered, confident Australian Muslims that are positive contributors to their communities and the fabric of the wider Australian society. This is our vision for Australian Muslims. We see our role at Crescent not just being a provider of financial services for the Muslim community, not just halal super. That is only the most basic thing we do. Our role over the next 10 years is much greater. We hope to cultivate, elevate and facilitate the success of the Australian Muslim community and to build respect for the pioneers who worked hard to achieve it whilst contributing to the social fabric of Australia by at least one thread of it. And I'm proud to say, sitting in this august group, the pioneers of the Australian Muslim community are sitting amongst us, and they give me great pride and pleasure. I won't name them all because I fear I'll miss out one, but they know who they are. This year, Crescent Wealth has a couple of ideas I'd like to share with you that we want to grassroots try and address some of these issues, some solutions to the problems I've just described. This year in Ramadan, we've decided, this Ramadan, that we will dedicate more than 20% of Crescent Wealth's pre-tax income to 10 charitable ACNC registered institutions that have a tremendous impact on our communities, mostly in Australia, but also in shared communities overseas. These institutions focus on a range of areas, from tackling financial abuse to supporting refugees, youth empowerment, and preventing homelessness. The way it works is that Crescent will top up $10,000 for each of these charities if they are able to raise more than $50,000 from their own networks during the month of Ramadan. We hope to raise $500,000 with your support. Now, me personally, I'm lacking a bit. I'm one of the 10. I'm raising money for the Crescent Foundation. I'm at $7,000. Please give generously. I'm being embarrassed. The other organisations are bidding. Mustafa, you're in the gun there. The next idea that we have that we're implementing is called the Crescent Awards. Through our philanthropic sister entity, the Crescent Foundation will soon be launching the Crescent Awards for students, teachers and schools in partnership with the South Australian University Centre for Islamic Thought and Education with our full support. Our goal and intention for this group of awards is aligned to what we stand for as an institution. If we want to nurture holistic leaders for our community, we must start from childhood. Our first generation was squarely focused on academic achievement as a means of levelling the playing field. But as we know, academic achievement is not the only measure of success. 70% of our community has reached that level. There are plenty of us right in the room who have gone to achieve significant accomplishments, and none of it had anything to do with academic prowess. In my case, it was notwithstanding my academia. I wasn't a very good student. It's a problem. I didn't come to La Trobe. We must start to recognise and reward the future holistic development, because that is what will make us, apart from a representative body to our Creator, everybody wants us to a representative body within the Australian, broader Australian community. We must start to recognise, reward and develop our religious ethics as they exist in Australian society through education, our health, our family, and with material achievements that are balanced. With these awards, we seek to recognise schools, teachers and students that are paving the way and building the essential mindsets that will power our community into the future. Our goal with the students that receive these awards is to empower them with networks, access and mindset coaching. And the final one, strategy I'll mention tonight, is Muslims at Work campaign. Tonight is an example of a wonderful institution walking the talk, celebrating a very important occasion for Australian Muslims. When I was growing up in Sydney and in Melbourne, iftar was a word you had to look up. Today, vice-chancellors, politicians, leaders, professors, all walks of life understand what we are doing or have some knowledge of it and happily partake, and that is progress. But there's more to do. With the Muslims at Work campaign, we'll be seeking to make it easier for large segments of Muslim professionals to practice their faith every day. The campaign will champion 3 basic Muslim needs or rights that will transform the practice of Islam in the contemporary workplace. These are for organisations to provide dedicated prayer rooms. So universities have dedicated prayer rooms. Parliaments have dedicated prayer rooms. Airports have dedicated prayer rooms, but not anywhere else. Muslims don't just exist in those institutions. The second initiative is to guarantee holidays, maybe by way of annual leave, for the 2 days of Eid, or our celebration. And so gone are the days when we had to say to the teacher, look, I need to take it off, I can't come to school, why? Well, it's Eid, and then you've got to explain, well, what does that mean? So, I'm sick. It's just easier. Gone are the days where you have to explain to your employer that you really can't come on Tuesday or Wednesday, you're not sure when Eid is going to fall, because Ramadan, we're not sure when Ramadan is going to end. It should be recognised. Now, the plan and the hope is that if you're a practicing Muslim, you get that as part of, in addition, but if not, as part of your annual leave, as a guaranteed day off. And the third item is flexible working hours during Ramadan, where obviously Muslims have more significant prayer and hold a fast between sunrise and sunset. Now, we'll initially target support from the largest corporates in Australia. People think I'm starting at the wrong end. I think that's exactly where we need to start. But over time, we'll seek to make this movement for all corporate entities. Not only will supporting Australian Muslims help organisations meet the ESG criteria, it will also demonstrate a genuine commitment to multiculturalism, diversity and inclusion. It also, by the way, improves productivity. A study of the diversity in business performance by the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. Those damn Victorians always great with human rights. They're the leaders in this country. And Deloitte, might add, report that if 10% more employees feel included in an organisation, their work attendance increased per employee by 1 day per year, which is huge. I urge you all to support this important and imminent initiative by taking information about it to your employer, if you wish, or your client, or your partner, or your institution. All resources can be found on muslimsatwork.org. And finally, and thank you for bearing with me. As I said earlier, the Australian Muslim community is a far stronger place than it was 10 years ago. I feel the growing unity in conversations with many community leaders. Yes, we are building institutions, but we need many more. The only way to do this is if we harness the collective energy and wealth of expertise that our community has, and that we ally and collaborate with wonderful institutions like Trobe, who can do so much for us and are doing so much as we build the infrastructure of our community and its culture. I urge you all, if you haven't done so, to consider using these talents and the organisations that support us to harness this and build ever strongly. And finally, I'd like to thank you very much, and may Allah, may God accept our good deeds and fasting during this holy month. Assalamu alaikum. God bless, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen.